राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी गोपी जना वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपी जना वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी गोपी जना वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन 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 यमुना तीर वनचारी यमुना तीर वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपी जना वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजना यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजना यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजना यशोदानंदन यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजना यमुना तीर वनचारी यमुना तीर वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गौर प्रेमानंदी हरि हरि बोल। जय विष्णुपद परम आचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद श्रील अभय चरणानंद भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। आनंद कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। नाम आचार्य श्रील ठाकुर हरिदास की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम राधा कुंद गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। वृंदावन धाम की जय। नवद्वीप मायापुर धाम की जय। गंगा देवी की जय। यमुना मई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी रानी की जय। समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन पीवीथी संस्थापक आचार्य श्री प्रभुपाद की जय। गौ प्रेमानंदी। All glory Sri Assembled devotees. All glory Sri Assembled devotees. All glory Sri Assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Jai Shri Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Thank you for inviting me to speak here at this sacred place and in such august company. I was thinking that perhaps we could read something about one of Krishna's pastimes that is very famous, and maybe it's relevant to the modern world. In Vrindavan 5,000 years ago, when Krishna came, of course he exhibited so many pastimes, and he was dispatching demons for the pleasure of his transcendental associates, and he was also executing his wonderfully attractive activities just to induce the rest of us down here in the material world to take to Krishna consciousness and to rejoin him in his eternal transcendental lilas or pastimes with his pure devotees. So we can maybe speak a little bit about that, but in order to invoke auspiciousness, let's begin with mangala charana. And briefly I'll say, Om Ajnanativirantasya Gnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Vansha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. In an old stotra, Sanskrit stotra written by Srila Bilvamangal Thakur we don't really know when he wrote it, but it was around at the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The stotra is called Govinda Damodara Stotra because every line ends with the refrain, Govinda Damodara Madhaveti. He describes the episode of Krishna's chastisement of the Kalia serpent. When Krishna was in Vrindavan, there was one Kalia serpent who was an asura or a demon, and he was envious, so envious that he was producing venom all the time. And with this venom, he had actually poisoned the waters of the Yamuna. And the waters of the Yamuna River became, it was so polluted that if anybody would try to take his bath in the river Yamuna at that time, they would at least get sick, if not die. Does it sound familiar? We're having this problem nowadays also, especially within the last 3 or 4 decades. I read an article by one of the leading citizens of Vrindavan. He owns a bookstore in Purana Bajar. And he was describing in this article that even 30 years ago, if someone would throw a coin into the Yamuna, they would watch it go down to the bottom, and they would be able to see it there. 30, 40 years ago. And I myself remember the first time I went to bathe in the Yamuna, I was diving deep and drinking deep also, the water, without any fear of anything. It was like that. about 15 years ago, one of the chief priests in one of Vrindavan's leading temples, the temple of Sri Radharaman, and the priest's name is Srivats Goswami, he stopped taking his bath in the Yamuna River, although that was the practice of his family. The entire family of priests there had been doing this for some 500 years. And he had to break with that tradition simply because it was so carcinogenic and so polluted that it was not possible. Why? Because the situation nowadays is that due to increase in corruption, for one thing, and increase in businesses, and increase in population, but really increase in the use or misuse of the river, 90% of the Yamuna's river is actually diverted before it even gets to the plains. Before it leaves the Himalayas, 90% of it is shunted into Haryana or into Himachal Pradesh or Uttaranchal, and it's meant to, it's for irrigation and other purposes. About 10% of the Yamuna's water actually makes it as far as Delhi. And you can guess how much of that 10% gets out of Delhi alive. Do you know what the difference is between living water and dead water? Many people don't. It's a good idea to drink only spring water because living water is that water that has prana within it. Actually, prana is distributed throughout the universe in all elements, including water. But if water is moving and is not blocked up artificially, in other words, if it's not dammed, and nowadays we talk about dam politics. Of course, we also talk about dam politics. But, it's a big problem in every country. I mean, here in California, I'm sure you all know very well, there's no water here either. Without water, a civilization perishes. Mohenjo-Daro, many scholars speculate, the water ran out, and even though it was a highly sophisticated civilization, comparable to our own, about 3,000 years before Christ, in the earliest estimations, now there's nothing there at all, except the indications of this great civilization and the script that nobody has yet been able to decipher. Once they figure out what those writings in Mohenjo-Daro and other places mean, we will have some keys to a very mysterious and highly sophisticated civilization that has ceased to exist. Scientists speculate because of water. I don't want to get too far off topic, but the Yamuna, that 10% of the Yamuna's water that goes into Delhi, it is returned to the Yamuna basin and it continues to flow downstream, but it has either been processed through a factory or through a human body. And so there's virtually no real fresh Yamuna water flowing there anymore. And so this was a condition some 5,000 years ago as well, when Krishna came. And because the Yamuna was offending his because the Kalia serpent, who was inhabiting a particular lake, which was formed from the Yamuna's waters, because he was creating a disturbance, Krishna decided to chastise him just to give us some message, we hope. So in Bilva Mangala Thakur's Govinda Damodar Stotra, he says, Jalashaye Kalia Mardanaya Yada Kadam Bada Abatan Murarihi Gopanganascha Krushuretya Gopa Govinda Damodara Madhaveti. It's better this way. Jalashaye Kalia Mardanaya Yada Kadam Badapatan Murarihi Gopanganascha Krushuretya Gopa Govinda Damodara Madhaveti. Govinda Damodara Madhaveti. When Lord Murari jumped out of the water from the Kadamba branch to chastise the Kalia serpent, the gopis and gopas came out and cried, Govinda, Damodar, Madhava. The story as it goes is that Krishna came to dispatch this Kalia serpent. and he jumped into the water from the branch of a kadam tree that was hanging over the Yamuna. Nowadays, not too many things, you don't find any living thing along the bank of the Yamuna, very few at least. Last time I visited Gokula, I went to Brahmanda Ghat, where we have photographs of Srila Prabhupada bathing happily with the devotees from the 1970s, about 40 years ago. And at that very same spot, I went to the bottom of the steps on the bathing ghat, and I saw that there was a 2-foot-high blanket of soap suds from one bank of the river to the opposite bank. And looking downstream, I could see that it extended as far as the eye could see downstream. And looking upstream, I could see that it extended as far as the eye could see upstream as well. When I moved away the soap suds, I picked up a handful of water, and it was darkish, blackish, and translucent, not transparent, and viscous. And I poured it out and had to go wash my hands. I actually washed my glasses with the water just to see. And of course, when you wash your glasses, you understand the quality of the water. It took some time to clean them off. So farmers now are getting sick all along the Yamuna basin, and that's why there's a lot of political agitation now that's one reason at least. They're dying. They're getting cancer because the Yamuna has become completely carcinogenic. 20 times the acceptable limit of pollution. Acceptable limit of pollution. Acceptable limit of pollution. That's a maybe oxymoronic concept, but in India these things are possible. And it's 20 times over that. 20 times. And this was 15 years ago. The figures that I'm quoting are 15 years old. So who knows what it is now. Anyway, the GBC and ISKCON has encouraged ISKCON devotees to increase the discussion of the Yamuna River, her, of course, transcendental glories, and her unfortunate status at the present day. And there are efforts to clean up the Yamuna. Maybe now with a new government in India that will happen, we'll see. But at any rate, Krishna jumped into the water, and this Kalia serpent became so incensed that the Kalia serpent came up to kill Krishna. Kalia serpent was a many-headed cobra, and each head was biting at Krishna, and eventually the serpent enwrapped Krishna in his coils, and the vrajavasis were all completely anxious about this. It's a long story, which we'll say some more about. But ultimately, Krishna showed them. He got out of the coils of the serpent, and he started to dance on each of the hoods of the Kalia serpent. And when he did so, he was doing so in such an artistic manner that, in effect, the gopis could understand that this is the most wonderful personality in all existence. And they were completely struck with love for Krishna when they saw this. Now, Krishna's purpose at the same time was to exhaust the Kalia serpent. And when the serpent became completely exhausted and beaten down to the point almost of death, then finally the serpent surrendered. After his wives, because the serpent had many wives who were devotees, his wives actually interceded on his behalf and prayed to Lord Krishna that please spare our husband, don't kill him. So Krishna let him go, but he banished him from that place forever. It's said, this is, for what it's worth, the tradition says that the Kalia serpent banished from the Yamuna in Vrindavan, then went out to the ocean, downstream to the ocean, and eventually swam over to some place around the Fiji Islands. So therefore Prabhupada installed Kalia Krishna in Fiji, worshipping Krishna as the Kalia Mardana. So, the shloka that we've just read, it means, when Lord Murari jumped into the water from the Kadamba branch to chastise the Kalia serpent, the gopis and gopas came and cried out, Govinda, Damodar, Madhava. So due to natural envy, the serpent Kalia had polluted the waters of the Yamuna, thus discoloring and making it harmful to all other living beings, especially Krishna's dearmost devotees. While trying to exploit Krishna's energies, modern demons similarly harass other living beings, also polluting even Yamuna Devi. But unlike irresponsible industrialists of the present day, Kalia only polluted his own lake, which Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has commented was separated from the main branch of from the main body of the Yamuna and thus didn't affect residents of Mathura and areas downstream. That's from his commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, chapter 16, text number 4. So as I said earlier, he had his own lake there that was formed from the Yamuna, but was actually, separate. Nowadays, the whole Yamuna is destroyed, at least from... As soon as the Yamuna leaves the Himalayas, immediately the Yamuna is either, scattered or dammed or polluted all the way downstream. So it's being severely abused right now. Lord Krishna decided to rectify the situation. According to Acharyas commenting on this pastime as it's described in Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, chapters 16 and 17, the Lord tightened his belt, tied back his hair, and slapped his arms before he jumped in the water, displaying no lack of confidence whatsoever. In other words, displaying his transcendental pastimes just appropriate to boyhood, the Lord was apparently in the mood to fight. Aside from troubling vrajavasis such as Krishna's cowherd playmates, Kalia Nag had previously also offended Garuda. However, Krishna ultimately excused Kalia, and his extreme kindness on Kalia is further described below in connection with text number 33. So this was text 30 of the Govinda Damodar Stotram. So I'm going to skip ahead and read that text because it continues the same pastime. And that verse says, Sarovare Kalya Nagabadham Shishum Yashodatanayam Nishamye Chakrulutantya Patigopabala Govinda Damodara Madhaveti Govinda Damodara Madhaveti. When the cowherd boys heard that Yashoda's son, a mere child, was enveloped within the coils of the Kalia serpent within the lake, they rolled along the path and cried, Govinda, Damodar, Madhava. The poor cowherd boys, they were very anxious. We'll hear some more details here. In some manuscripts of this stotra, this verse appears just after the text 30. Naturally, they go together and the topic is connected. So, in the last verse that we read, Krishna had jumped into the poisonous lake where Kalia lived, but now he's enwrapped in the evil serpent's coils. The word shishu, or child, and Yashoda Tanaya suggest that Krishna was merely a baby, or perceived as one. And the term Gopabala may be taken as either masculine or feminine, and so it may thus refer to either the gopis or the cowherd boys. Possibly the author intended to suggest both, as in Srimad Bhagavatam 10.16.10 and 19, Shukdev Goswami and later commentators mentions the cowherd boys and men, as well as the village girls and elders. So everybody was in anxiety, that's the point here. The vrajavasis were apprehensive about Krishna going out without Balaram that day, because Kalia's poisonous lake was known as a dangerous, remote place. So just as all mothers do, don't go and play near the lake. And so where's the first place where he went to play? He went to the lake. Because whatever they tell you not to do, that's what you want to do when you're a child. So Krishna is playing the part of this childhood lila exactly in accordance with what we expect of a child. It's only to give pleasure to his transcendental mother. His mother is transcendental and her child is also transcendental. It's all a big lila. In other words, nato natyataro yatha. Just as an actor on the stage, he's got his own personality, but while he's on stage and playing that part, it's perfect. And everybody, so perfect that if it's a tragedy, everyone in the audience cries, right? Actually, this is an interesting point. Rupa Goswami has explained like this. We talk about rasa. Does anyone know what rasa means? Rasa. means, it's one of these words that everyone understands, but it's very hard to translate because it means many things all at once. So rasa means a particular taste. It means a particular feeling. It means a particular flavor or emotion, a particular enjoyment that we derive from something. Juice, we might say. Mellows, rasa, feeling, mood, etc. So the rasa, actually, it's a dramatic term that comes from a long, long history of Sanskrit drama. And generally it's used only in a dramatic sense. But somehow or other Rupa Goswami saw that this term is exactly the term that we require in order to explain how Krishna lila works in this world. So in order to understand how Krishna's lilas or his pastimes work in this world, we need to understand how drama works in this world. When we watch television, because, well, nowadays nobody watches television anymore either, but when we see a movie, let's say, even it's a war movie, you feel enjoyment watching people get blown to bits, especially if it's an American movie. Because American movies have to have two things, and we all know what they are, in order to be successful. So even though you're watching someone who is suffering, you actually, in fact, an American audience at least does not feel they got their money's worth unless they see people being blown to bits, in a war movie at least. And, in a tragedy, it's something like that as well. The reason that we can take pleasure, I don't want to say take pleasure in another person's distress, because it's not real distress. The point is that we know that. We know that it's only a movie. But while we're absorbed in the movie, we forget that it's just a movie, isn't it? That's how we can empathize with the character in the movie. If it's a, quote, tear-jerker, right? A very sad story, everyone will become crying, especially the women, because they have soft hearts. Us men, we have too big egos, we can't, But an audience can cry, actually, by seeing, a very sad drama. And, a martial-spirited audience can derive great pleasure from seeing people being ripped apart with bullets and whatnot. I think it was Steven Spielberg who said that what red-blooded American doesn't like to see people being eaten by dinosaurs? He made this movie about dinosaurs some time ago. What was it called? I don't remember now. Jurassic Park, exactly. Yeah, so, he caught the rasa of the American psychology. And he was able to exploit that. So in dramatic theory, the idea is that you assume at least momentarily a transcendental identity, or you're having an experience that in some level at least transcends your ordinary worldly and factual, objective existence in this mundane world. Subjectively, you're transported to a transcendental station of some sort. And in that play world, or in that dramatic world, you can enjoy certain sentiments for some time, and you're pleased by that. It doesn't matter whether it's happiness or distress in the movie, because it's all about ananda, hladini shakti, we can say, in a perverse sense. So this is what makes drama transcendental, and Abhinavagupta and other aestheticians have recognized that, and Rupa Goswami, being an educated person, he was quite aware of these things. So he took this well-known phenomenon, and he stated his theology in terms of this dramatic theory of rasa. And therefore he wrote his book on bhakti, the complete science of bhakti yoga, Srila Prabhupada said, and he titled it Bhakti Rasa Amrita Sindhu, the nectarian ocean of rasa that is derived from bhakti. And he said, just as in the mundane realm, you can have, say, they have 9 rasas in dramatic theory. And so Rupa Goswami said, similarly, in Krishna bhakti, you can have different rasas. These are called sthai bhavas. Does anybody know what the sthai bhavas are? They are tranquility or passive appreciation. That's called shantarasa. There's servitude. That's called dasya. And then there's friendship. That's called sakhya bhav. And then there's parental affection, called vatsalya. And finally, there's romantic or conjugal affection. That's called madhurya. So 5 of them. Passive, servitude, friendship, parenthood, and romance, or conjugal love. These are the 5 sthai bhavas. I mentioned this morning, we were in Folsom and did a program there. There's a famous esthetician in India who's now, I think, a member of the government. Her name is Kapila Vatsyayana. Anybody know this name? Some of the old-timers may know. So she said that actually the sthai bhav, or the permanent fixture of the Indian psychology, is what? Irshya. Irshya. What does irshya mean? Envy. I didn't say it. I'm just repeating. She's a very educated woman and an Indian. But the idea is that sthai bhava means we have a permanent sentiment which is just, it's intrinsic to us, especially in our spiritual life. In the material world, the things that we call permanent are not really so. Nothing's really permanent here. Nothing at all. That's something to meditate on. Anyway, so in addition to these 5 permanent rasas, there are 7 transitory rasas that come and go, such as, chivalrous, as we've already mentioned in connection with movies. We have a, hasya, which is comedy. We have disgust. We have wonder. So many things. These are secondary emotions. So the rasa. Anyway, the idea is that when Krishna was going out to the lake that day, the vrajavasis were plunged into this ocean of transcendental grief. But in the spiritual world, because it's only a movie, nato natya toro yatha, Bhagavatam says, Krishna performs his pastimes, transcendental pastimes, in much the same way that an actor performs. He has a transcendental identity that transcends his temporal role in the movie. You see? Or, if you want to look at it from the other perspective, his real personality is, he has his real personality, but transcendental to his real personality is the role in the movie. So it depends on what you want to focus on. You focus on the movie, then the movie role is the real identity. And who's to say that it's not more real than his actual life? Because both of them are temporary, right? So we can do that. Anyway, I don't want to get too philosophical here. But the idea is that because Krishna was performing transcendental activities like this, the vrajavasi sphere was very palpable, and it was actually a source of transcendental ecstasy. How so? In the spiritual world we see, in Krishna's pastimes also we see so many things, big monsters coming and Krishna has to kill them or chase them away as he did with Kalia, and this is ecstasy? How is it? Who knows the answer? Just like Aghasura we mentioned this morning, when Krishna's friends, they saw this big, massive snake. How high? As high as the, Transamerica Tower in San Francisco? Big. Actually, Prabhupada saw these skyscrapers in, I think it was Manhattan. He said, this is like Aghasura's teeth, isn't it? Big pointy steel, sharp things. So the boys just ran in there without a care in the world, singing and blowing on horns and having a great time. And they didn't have any fear because they knew. And even if it is a big snake, which some of them were saying it's a big snake, and others didn't believe it. But even if it is a big snake, still we know that Krishna is here and it's no problem. And in fact, it wasn't. So Krishna, in fact, it did turn out to be a big snake, and the boys were all been swallowed by the snake. But Krishna was there, and Krishna took care of them. That's another story we won't get into. The point is that nato natya dharo yatha. He performs these transcendental activities, and he assumes these identities only for the purpose of giving transcendental pleasure to his devotees. This is what God does. God has no duty to perform. We have to go to work. We have to pay bills, because actually we are paupers. Unless we go to work, unless we pay our bills, we can't have our desires fulfilled, because we're not the supreme enjoyer. If you're the supreme enjoyer, you don't have to worry about getting everything you need. It's automatically carried out. Na tasya karyam karanam cha vidyate, na tat samaschabhyadhikasya drishyate, parasya shaktir vividha eva shruyate, so bhavati jnana bala kriyacha. He has intrinsic awareness, intrinsic potency, and unlimited activities, which will carry out any desire that he wants. Therefore, he's called elsewhere in the Shruti mantra, Satya Kama, Satya Sankalpa. Whatever he determines his mind on, it's an instant fact. That is Krishna. We would like to have that position, would we not? That's why we're in America. This is where you get the money, and everybody knows this is as close as you get is with money, right? So this is called envy, unfortunately. Therefore, she said, this Thai bhava is irshya. She said, not me. So Krishna's leelas are a completely different creation. And Krishna only engages in his activities to give pleasure to his pure devotees. Because natasya karyam. What does kaj mean? Hindi mein. Those who know Hindi. Kaj. Yeah, you got to go to work. Kaj. It comes from Sanskrit, which is karya. And this is the word used in the Shruti mantra. Natasya karya. He doesn't have a job. He's unemployed because rich men, there's no need. Actually, Prabhupada said about devotees, rich men's sons don't work. He was walking, I think it was in Cheviot Hills, no? And the Prabhupada is saying, look, these people, they work so hard and they put together such a nice park, but they're out working hard and we're walking in the park enjoying it. Say, why are we doing this? Because rich men's sons don't work. We're all sons of God. Krishna, he's got all the money. Bhagavan means he's got all the money and every other opulence as well. So we don't have to worry about this. In exactly the same way that the cowherd boys didn't have to worry about walking into Aghasura's mouth. Devotees actually do not have to worry about their maintenance. Why? The source of your paycheck is not the source of your maintenance. This is something we need to meditate on. The source of your paycheck is not the source of your maintenance. That requires some meditation. So that's, of course, the subject of another class as well. But anyway, so Krishna's lila is only meant to give pleasure to his devotees. That's his only occupation. He has no obligation. Therefore, he does what he wants. And this is what he wants. Because he loves. This is real love. He loves. Selfless love. And that's a big topic. Anyway, so the vrajavasis love Krishna in this transcendental platform, and Krishna also loves his devotees on this transcendental platform, and everything that either one of them does is actually only meant to give pleasure to the other one. The devotees, the gopis, and others, every endeavor is only to give pleasure to Krishna. And Krishna's only endeavor is to give pleasure to his devotees, bas. That's all that they do. Now, therefore, they were apprehensive about Krishna going out without Balaram that day because it was known as a dangerous remote place. Why without Balaram? Who is Balaram? Bade Bhai. He's big brother Balaram. And as long as Balaram's around, Mother Yashoda feels secure that Krishna will be all right because he's big brother and he looks out for his little brother. Therefore, what is another name for Krishna? Ramanuja. What does Ramanuja mean? Rama, Anuja. Anuja means the one who takes birth afterwards. And Rama is, of course, Balaram. Actually, we're talking about Yamuna, are we not? Anybody know what is the etymology of the word Yamuna in Sanskrit? This is a Sanskrit factoid. Ah? No, that's another. It actually is not, etymologically, it's not related to Yama. Well, it is actually, you're right. Yama Anuja. But through corruption, it's become Yamuna. Because her brother is Yamaraj. Everybody knows what Bhayaduj is. North Indians know Bhayaduj. We call it in Sanskrit Yamadvitiya. On this day, Yamuna Devi, if you go to Mathura and bathe in Vishram Ghat and worship, there's a small temple there we call them Yami Yama. Yamaraj and his sister Yami. She's called Yami. Just like Bakasura's sister is called Baki, so Yama's sister is called Yummy, but she's better known as Yamuna. So if you go there, you will not have to visit Yamaraj. Why? Because this is a long story. I don't know how long I have to go, but I'm not really reading, which I'm supposed to be doing, but it's a lot of fun to hear these stories also. So Yamaraj and Yamuna are the son and daughter of whom? Surya, the sun god. And Surya had, his wife is named? Sandhya. But he's got a co-wife. And his second wife is named? Chaya. Why Chaya? Because his first wife, Sandhya, she could not stand the blazing effulgence of her husband. Even with sunglasses, it was too much. Maybe it even melted the sunglasses. We don't know. But she had a hard time with her husband because he was just too bright. So she decided, I'm going to go to my parents' place. This is what they do in India. When there's any problem in the family, she goes back to the... It's not like, I mean, of course, nowadays they've learned divorce and everything else they've learned as well. But the idea is that this is what a civilized woman will do if there's a problem. So she went back to her father's place, but she thought, this has to be a long-term arrangement and everybody's got to be happy with it. So she created a facsimile of herself. And that facsimile is called Chaya. Chaya means facsimile. So Chaya was not actually the mother of Yami and Yama. She was a facsimile of Sandhya only. And so the children could immediately sense that somehow or other she's not treating us the same way now. What's going on? And Yamaraj in particular, he was maybe more thoughtful about it, and he thought that something's not right here, I'm going. So he ran away from home. Sometimes children like to do this when they get mad, right? It's dangerous in the modern days because you don't know who's going to find them before you do. But Yamaraj, so he left like this, and Yami being his sister, younger sister, she was so distraught. She wants to have her buddy Bai back, her big brother. So she's looking all over around. She cannot find him anywhere. So she finally sits down and she decides to do some vrat or something and to make sure that he would come back. Finally, somehow or other, she found him. It was here at this place. So at that time, she tried to cajole him and please come back home again. I will cook you a nice feast. I'll do anything for you. She did so much for Yamaraj, and he was finally pleased. And he said, okay, I'm very happy with you now. You please ask me whatever you want. And she said, I asked the benediction, not only will you come home, of course, that's understood, but anybody who bathes in my water, he will not have to see you at the time of death. Because who is Yamaraj? Yama? He's the god of death. When you die, if you're not Krishna conscious, or if you're not particularly pious, then Yamaraj and his henchmen, they will come and you'll have to have an unpleasant interview to discuss your karmic debits with him. And that, we don't know where that leads. It depends on what you've done. So not many people are so eager to go and see Yamaraj. So Yamuna Devi said, let it be so that they don't have to see you and have this uncomfortable time. Anybody who bathes in my waters. And instantly Yamuna said, hey, how can I do that? Your waters are stretching from the Himalayas all the way to... I'll be emptied out. I'll be as dry as California. So she said, okay, in that case, then at least on this day, anybody who comes to Mathura and worships us together like this, because today's happy day, and then we'll be in a good mood and give him benediction, and he doesn't have to see you anymore. Right? Therefore, we say, Kriyate yasya yamena na charcha, Shankaracharya says, in a similar context. So that's called Yamadvitiya or Bhayaduj. That's the origin of that festival. But anyway, we should get back to the story here. Kalia's lake was poisonous. It was not particularly part of the Yamuna, but it was from the Yamuna. So the vrajavasis were all fearful. They knew that Krishna was out by himself. Balaram didn't go out that day. For what reason? Does anyone remember? What is it, his birthday? I don't remember offhand myself. Anyway, he didn't go out that day. He stayed home. And then they started seeing bad omens. There are certain omens. If you see certain things happening, then it's either it means something good will happen or it means something bad will happen. It's a great science, and nowadays it's being lost. But 30 years ago, one of my godbrothers went to South India to study from a famous astrologer there. And he had a doubt in his mind as to whether he should even take up that practice or not. So he went to the astrologer to ask him about that and see what he thought about it. So as soon as he entered the room, the astrologer immediately looked at him, looked at the clock, looked at the surroundings, and then told him, "Here's your question, and here's the answer," before he could say a word, because he was expert in the science of omens. And he later explained that I saw the omen, I looked at the clock and saw the time, I did a quick calculation in my head, because when you're very good, you can do that if you're an astrologer. It's all based on the time of the question being asked. It's like the time a question is asked is like the birth of the question. So that's like you can calculate it as astrological thing from that. Anyway, so they saw some omens like that, and no one was sure just what had happened at first, because Krishna had left even his friends and gone on ahead by himself to the lake, all by himself. Srila Prabhupada describes the scene in Nectar of Devotion, chapter 47. He says, quote, "When Krishna entered the Yamuna river, which had become very poisonous from the presence of Kalia, Mother Yashoda feared all kinds of mishaps, and she was breathing hotly. Tears from her eyes were soaking her clothes, and she was almost collapsing." This is what we might call women's intuition, or at least mothers. They know when something's not right. Along with the others, Yashoda began anxiously searching for Krishna like a cow bereft of her calf. In Sanskrit we say, "Pranashta vatsam iva vatsalam gam." This is what one poet has written, a cow bereft of her calf. So along with the others, Yashoda began anxiously searching for Krishna in this way. According to Srimad Bhagavatam 10:16-17, they all simply followed the path marked by Krishna's all auspicious footprints, because wherever Krishna goes in Vrindavan, he has certain emblems imprinted on his feet, and when he leaves his footprints, it's very characteristic. What are some of the things that are marking Krishna's feet? Who knows? Picture Krishna's feet, and then tell me what you see. Flag, discus, elephant goad, so many things, right? So they were looking at Krishna's all auspicious footprints in this way. Bilva Mangala Thakur has elsewhere described this. He says, Lalitani yadiyani lakshmani vrajavasis. On all the paths of footprints, Maninu Puravachalam Vande Tatcharanam Vibhoho. I offer my respectful obeisances into the lotus feet of this all-auspicious, all-powerful Supreme Personality of Godhead, his feet make a pretty jangling sound because they're wearing, what do you call nupur in English? Ankle bracelets with little bells. And they leave these imprints on the soft sand. Even a few years ago in Vrindavan, now it's all paved over, but it used to be that in Raman Reti, you could see this soft, gleaming sand, and it was as if you had millions of tiny, tiny gold dust particles. So beautiful. Even now, if you look hard, you can find it in certain places, but you've got to look hard now. It's something like what they've done to Yamuna. It's happening even with Yamuna Devi as well. So anyway, this is what they saw, and they were following these footprints anxiously. What happened next? Let's continue. Thus, searching for Krishna, the vrajavasis intently focused on the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they achieved thereby an exalted position that even the greatest of yogis failed to attain. That's something that's stated also in the 12th chapter of the 10th canto. In other words, as the author elsewhere states, the vrajavasis' one-pointed devotion effortlessly excelled the 8-pointed discipline of the yogis. Everybody's heard of Ashtanga Yoga? Means 8-pointed discipline, but the gopis had 1-pointed discipline. This is called Vyavasayatmika Buddhi, or Ekangrachitta Buddhi, fixed on one thing. Actually, Tamal Krishna Goswami one time, he was deflecting some criticism that he had heard. He said, sometimes people tell us, you Hare Krishna people, you have one-track minds. So he said, no, we actually have multi-track minds, but every track is on Krishna. So I guess that's a Chinja Beda Beda. You can figure that out. Anyway, so the cowherd boys were the first ones to arrive at the scene, naturally. The children are always first, isn't it? They run ahead. And the cowherd boys' arrival was followed shortly by some of the cowherd men who had also happened to be working nearby. These cowherd men, they were the first ones to notice it. And they sent somebody to go and tell the vrajavasis that we think there's some trouble here. That's how some of them got alerted that way. So then the gopis and other vrajavasis arrived, and upon finding Krishna gripped tightly within Kaliya's coils, the residents of Vrindavan, especially the gopis, became almost senseless with shock and grief. Everyone was distressed. Even the cows were crying. The gopis were utterly and constantly attached to Krishna. The instant they saw their dearmost Krishna in that condition, they remembered all his loving dealings with them, his smiling glances, all of the talks they had with him. And considering that they might lose him at any moment, their entire universe went void. Those who remained conscious tried to recount Krishna's pastimes, or simply cried out his various names, as mentioned in this verse. But many of them couldn't do that. Having arrived and seen this situation, Yashoda, Krishna's mother, went virtually mad and had to be forcibly held down by her friends. In equally severe shock, Nanda Maharaj, Krishna's foster father, even told Yashoda to jump into the poisonous lake along with him. They wanted to kill themselves because they thought Krishna cannot live through this. We were discussing this morning, when we love Krishna intently, the way that the vrajavasis love Krishna, then we become conditioned that there must be some kind of maya that conditions them to forget Krishna's godhood, because nobody in Vrindavan remembers that Krishna is God. And that is called Yoga Maya. So when we love Krishna like that, then this Yoga Maya potency kicks in and conditions us such that we can't imagine that Krishna can get out of this problem. It is meant to heighten the emotion only and to intensify the devotional experience. This is what happens, you see? It's the opposite of what happens when we're conditioned by the Mahamaya potency, which is what affects those of us who have turned away from God in this world. When we get covered over by the Mahamaya potency, then we simply suffer. And it's not ecstasy. Is it? Raise your hand if you think it's ecstasy. Somebody thinks it's ecstasy, that's considered to be a psychological disorder. Now, by the way, did you know that 50% of the college students in North America have all been clinically diagnosed with at least one psychological disorder? That's something to think about. And over that amount of mothers under 30 are not married. So it's not going to be fun in the next generation. But that's another matter. Anyway, so they were all completely in shock, and Nanda Maharaj, and he was thinking that Yashoda and I should simply kill ourselves because it's all over. We cannot live without him. This is what they thought. So, this is why Krishna is sometimes called Nanda Prana. Nanda Pran means he is the life of Nanda Maharaj. If you take away Krishna, the life has already left the body. There are some beautiful, beautiful statements made about this love, the depth of this love, in Srila Rupa Goswami's Padyavali, which is a book that is being published in the near future by the BBT out of Vrindavan. So, anyway, he's called Nanda Pran, means Nanda Maharaj's very life. He's called Radha Jivan Vallabha. Anybody who's been to Vrindavan, you may know that just near the Narasingha temple and Radha Vallabh temple, there's a small temple, esoteric place that only residents know. And that deity is called Radha Jivan Vallabha, the one who is more dear to Srimati Radharani than life itself, Krishna. Then he's also called Gopi Pranadhana, the life and treasure of the gopis, and so on. There are so many names we could go on all night. Many other cowherds and gopis were ready to jump into the poisonous lake as well. But Balaram, fully aware of Krishna's power, somehow restrained them all in various ways appropriate to each one of them. Balaram. Thank God for Balaram. Balaram ki. Vaishnava Acharya. He's always in the mood of service to his younger brother. Even though he's older brother, but he knows that Krishna is the real thing. Actually, there's a wonderful purport. There's a one or two sentence purport that Prabhupada writes in the 10th canto. And Prabhupada writes so simply, but so profoundly at the same time. He says, in such transcendental pastimes, Krishna is the chief hero, and Balaram provides additional help. So we love Balaram. And if you go to Vrindavan, then you know that Balaram is Birajman Hain in Krishna Balaram Mandir. He's presiding gloriously there. Vaishnava Acharyas say that Krishna remained in this condition for nearly an hour. We've been hearing about it maybe for nearly an hour as well. But seeing all the vrajavasis so terribly distraught and showing them kindness, Krishna gloriously broke free from Kaliya's coils, and he gave the snake an unexpected thrashing in the most extraordinary way. In the most extraordinary way. Please listen. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 10:16, 28, and 9, whenever Kalia raised one of its poisonous hoods to challenge Krishna, the Lord would subdue it at once with his powerful dancing. If Kaliya's one hood would rise, he would jump on top of that and push it down. Another one would come up, he would hop over there and push that one down. And for Krishna, this was no problem because he has Ashesha Teja, infinite might. And this is just, it's child's play for him. Child's play. Bilvamangala Thakur has elsewhere describes this scene as follows. This is from Bilvamangala Stava 3.7. Ahishidasi sametam venumapurayansam valana valana gatya kaliyam chalayantyam kutila valayashtya tatphanam darayantam namata namata nityam shri yashodasutam tam namata namata nityam shri yashodasutam tam. That means playing on his flute, moving about while dancing with alacrity upon the head of the Kalia serpent, he trounces it, splitting open its head with a deft whack of his crooked stick. Bow down always to that son of Sri Yashoda, Krishna. So many hoods we've described already. Sometimes he'll whack it with his stick and pop it open, and the blood will fly through the sky, like droplets of coral flying through the sky. And then he jumps over to another one, and in this way, Krishna is simply showing his superlative artistry. And to whom is he showing it? To his devotees, especially the gopis. Krishna. So during this wonderful fight, the innumerable droplets of splashing water combined with drops of blood from Kaliya's split heads must have looked like a riotous explosion of diamonds and polished coral. While Krishna danced beautifully atop Kaliya's multiple moving hoods in this way, many, many demigods began to accompany the Lord with musical instruments and drums. But they were frustrated by the inimitable musical talent of Krishna and simply could not keep up with his tal or with his ragas. They couldn't do it. The Lord, in this way, gradually exhausted Kalia, who ultimately surrendered, badly beaten. Earning himself the name Kalia Mardana, the chastiser of Kalia, Lord Krishna emerged even from this most terrifying situation as heroically as always. Kalia Mardan Krishna ki. In his Kanduka Stuti, Sri Madhvacharya suggests that vanquishing Kalia was but child's play for the Lord. he says, Kalia naga kshwelini hanta. Kshela in Sanskrit, kshwela, the word kshwela. It translates, you can guess, in modern Indian languages as Kela. Kela means play. Not only did Krishna conquer Kalia, but he did so with astonishing dexterity, artistic flair, and ultimately great kindness. Although the Yamuna River has long since changed its course, pilgrims visiting Sri Vrindavan Dham still worship the spot where all this occurred. The Bhakti Ratnakar fifth wave states that if one bathes at Kalia Ghat, he is freed from sinful reactions and may become successful in business endeavors, in case you're wondering. Today, near what was previously a bathing ghat, devotees circumambulate the ancient kadam tree and feel transcendental bliss, remembering the Lord's activities there. I mentioned already, it's also said that after being chastised and sent away by Krishna, Kalia fled to the present-day Fiji Islands. There, ISKCON founder Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, established the worship of Kalia Mardhan Krishna, surrounded by the Nagapatnis in the ISKCON temple at Lautoka. According to Vaishnava Acharyas, Kalia's life was spared largely through the prayerful intervention of his wives, who were sincere devotees who had often tried to convert their envious husband. Sometimes we find this. The wife is a good devotee, but the husband is, or vice versa. So they were in that situation. Kalia was thus fortunate enough to directly receive the Supreme Lord's rarely attained lotus feet upon his heads. Raise your hand if you've had this opportunity. Actually, we have. Every time when we come to the deity, do you have Shatari here? You put it on the head? Not all the time. Sometimes. So you have to be very fortunate. All right, so this is Kalia's, he received this mercy. In fact, the Puranas state that in some ages, Kalia actually carries Krishna when he's called to Kamsa's wrestling arena. That's a new thing, isn't it? This is from the Puranas. So although Kalia initially offended the Lord's carrier Garuda, he was eventually blessed to act as the Lord's carrier himself. Just see what Krishna's wonderful mercy. We discussed Krishna's mercy this morning in Folsom. It's too much, we said, to recount everything, but Krishna is especially merciful more than any other incarnation of the Lord. This is described not only in Srimad Bhagavatam and by the Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharyas, but even in the Vishnu Purana, which Rupa Goswami quotes in his Lagu Bhagavatamritam. That book is also coming out in the near future through the auspices of the BBT. So, what else? The reason is that his devotees were kind to him. Krishna's devotees were kind to Kalia and bless him, and Kalia had, in his own, for his own sake, he also surrendered in all humility. So because he surrendered in humility, after having been given some recommendation by the Lord's devotees, therefore he was given this great mercy. So we can figure out from this, what do we need to do? We need to have a sponsor for our soul. And we also need to surrender in humility. If we can do these things, then as long as His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada's name is resplendent within this world, then we are always in good condition. This is great mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur concludes that Kalia should be considered an eternally liberated soul. And like other such souls in Krishna's pastimes, he went back to Godhead. That's in Srimad Bhagavatam 11:12:8. I think it's his commentary there. He eternally displayed pure devotion in Dasya rasa, this Kalia serpent. According to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, no rational explanation can adequately resolve the immense disparity between Kalia's extreme offenses and the extreme benevolence shown to him by Krishna. If we can get close, it's what I described from Laghu Bhagavatamrita. There's an entire passage in which Rupa Goswami dilates on this principle of Krishna's unique, incomparable, extreme kindness. Thank God. Thank Krishna. Thank Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and thank Srila Prabhupada. So, the Acharya also notes that although henceforth protected from any threat by Garuda, by the distinct imprints, Krishna's lotus feet upon his hoods, Kalia was ultimately not given any position of service within Vraja because he poisoned innocent devotees. So although he was given such kindness by Krishna, he was not allowed to render devotional service in Brajatam. So be careful about offending devotees. This is another lesson we can get here. Even if you have Krishna's lotus feet imprinted upon your head, you may not be able to actually live in Vrindavan Dham. This pastime has been elaborately described by Srila Jiva Goswami in his Gopal Champu, Purvibhag, chapter 13, and also by Kavi Karnapur in his Ananda Vrindavan Champu, and also by other great devotees as well. The following verse is also attributed to Srila Bilvamangala Thakur. Madamaya adamayad uragam yamunam avatirya viryashaliyah mamarate raskriti shamana parah sakriyat krishnah. He who ardently quashes the demigod's complacence and who subdued the impudent serpent after descending into the Yamuna, may that heroic Krishna steady my love. Bilvamangala Stava 2.80 also says, Mathura patika murarir upageyam dwari ballavi vachanam punarapi yamuna salile Kalia granalo jwalanti. At her door, a cowherd woman's words to Murari on the road to Mathura were, once again, the fire of the Kaliya's poison burns in the water of the Yamuna. So, I think we should probably stop here. I don't know what the time is, but maybe if anybody has any questions or comments on any of this, we can try to address. Vaisesika Prabhu, did you want to add anything, please?
You mentioned about Krishna's footprints in Vrindavan. I had also read that they're always visible. And then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, how is that? Because there's millions and billions of cows and residents in Vrindavan, and that he says they're careful to walk around them and make sure they never step on them. So there's this...
They're still there. There are several places in Vrindavan, even in the rocks become so ecstatic when Krishna stepped there that his footprint is still there in hard rock. And you can go and touch those lotus footprints. The Braj Bhasha poet Surdas also said very poetically that after Krishna left for Mathura, these doleful cows are so much feeling separation from him, all they can do is, wander circles around Krishna's footprints and every once in a while try to sniff them and wonder when will he come back. Elsewhere, Mangala Thakur also says the cows, they wander along the banks of the Yamuna, and when they see the footprints of Krishna, they sniff those footprints, and they perceive the scent of Vedanta in the footprints of Krishna. Okay, anything else? No questions? One question.
It's just adding to what you said, that the source of your payment is not the source of your maintenance. So I remember one devotee once was telling me that he was talking to one brahmachari and he said, Prabhu, my goal is to earn 10 million Indian rupees annually. So he said, the brahmachari told him, you may earn 10 million or 100 million, but don't forget that Krishna is your maintainer.
Yeah. There's a shloka that I recently saw in New York in the house of the host who was hosting us. And it said, with each and every breath, you should take the name of Rama. Every single breath, every single day, every breath. because you don't know whether you have either another day or another breath. You don't know. Okay, so if nobody has anything else to say, then we'll end here. Oh, one here in front.
Krishna Prabhu. How should I treat if I have some issues or problems in my life, should I consider it as results of my past sins or as a mercy of Krishna or both?
This is a very good question. In several places I've seen, notably in the 5th canto, chapter 2, in one of his purports regarding Priyavrata Maharaj, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur replies that when a devotee has to undergo difficulty or reverses in his life, serious problems in his life, there are usually 3 causes. One of them is that the devotee has committed some offense, and that's something we should, in all humility and honesty, consider also. Another possibility is that it's Krishna's mercy to elevate us for some reason that we don't know. Another reason is that it may be even Krishna's devotees' desire that we suffer for some reason that we can't understand as well. And that devotee, I believe, also indicates demigods. In fact, the demigods sometimes try to obstruct a devotee who is advancing in Krishna consciousness. This is described several places, and not only in Bhagavatam, but in the Shruti mantra as well. If a farmer loses even 1 cow, he becomes upset about that, even if he has hundreds of cows. And in the same way, the devatas, if someone checks out of the system of karma, kanda, it's kind of eating into their income, you might say, in a strange sort of way. Of course, nowadays, hardly anybody is even practicing karma anyway. The default in the modern day and age is no longer karma, but vikarma. And vikarma means papa, sinful. It's a sinful society that we're socialized in, and we have to realize that we are at a disadvantage in that way. It's sometimes like when you go to college, if you haven't taken enough foreign language credits, you've got to remove your deficiency before you can take a class to get credit for it. And this is the unfortunate situation in a society that has chosen to either reject Varnashram culture or has chosen to ignore it for whatever reason. So 3 reasons, he says. Either it's Krishna's inscrutable will, or there's some offense, or it's karma. Is that okay? We don't know which. That's why we pray. And we take shelter of spiritual masters and other devotees. Okay, in front here and then behind you.
So thank you so much for the wonderful class, Maharaj. I was thinking about the 2 points that you had said. One was have a sponsor for the soul. That was really, really powerful. And the second was surrender to Krishna in humility. So if you can elaborate a little bit more on the surrender process. Like
surrender and humility.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not the most qualified person to speak on that topic. For that, you have to see Vaisesika Prabhu. I don't know anything about humility or surrender. But I'm very lucky because I do have a sponsor. At least I can say that much. You had a question?
So, Prabhuji, you mentioned how Krishna is so uniquely merciful that he gave his footprint on the head of Kalia. Mm-hmm. But from what we see in the overall sense, it feels like he gave a higher punishment for him because he couldn't repent and serve those devotees whom he had offended. So how can we say that it's mercy? Because the big thing is deprived of you.
Well, there's different kinds of liberation, just as there are different kinds of love of Godhead, and there are different kinds of mercy as well. Everything is individualized in Krishna consciousness. And we have to read the Srimad Bhagavatam very sensitively and intelligently as well. And this brings to mind another pastime. We all know Kubja. Kubja was also approaching Krishna not in the purest of states, and Krishna reciprocated with her in ways that we would feel fortunate to receive. We should be so fortunate as she was. But ultimately, he did not fulfill her desire. Because, it's Acharya's comment that as if to demonstrate that, somebody who tries to manipulate the personality of Godhead or to fit the personality of Godhead into one's own agenda will not be reciprocated with, you see. So the mercy was definitely there, but what kind of mercy, to what degree, and of what quality, you see? This is where the staggering variety of options in Krishna consciousness becomes very evident, you see. In Brihad Bhagavatamritam, we find time after time after time, example after example of devotees that are pure devotees and who are considered to be perfect. But they're always pointing to someone else and saying that we don't know anything. You have to talk to that one if you want to understand bhakti, you see? And they're all valid, but this is called achintya bheda bheda, inconceivable oneness and difference. So there's all different kinds of love of Godhead, there's all different kinds of mercy, there's all different kinds of devotees. And this is how Krishna interacts with them in an individualized way, but he's always responsive. It's just a question of what kind of response and whether it's what we expected. Now, for those who have been around for several decades, you may have experienced, or at least you can hear, that life never turns out the way you expect it to turn out. It's always different than what you expect. So that we need to be prepared for as well. But if we surrender to Krishna in all sincerity, and if we awaken our love of Godhead, which is certainly possible because it's dormant within us all, then we can get what Lord Chaitanya calls Purnamrita Svadanam, the position that is completely relishable and unique to ourselves. Okay? That's a simple answer for a difficult question. I hope it's okay. You had a comment?
Thank you. Actually, we are talking here of mercy of Krishna. And can the very fact of living in the material world be an act of mercy from Krishna? Because if we have chosen to make that out of ignorance, so is that still considered mercy that we choose?
Yes, it is. And this is it's related to her question, because were we allowed to stay in the spiritual realm with the consciousness that we have embraced, then we would offend all of Krishna's devotees in exactly the way that Kalia did, isn't it? Therefore, Krishna has put us down here in what I sometimes call the, it's a correctional facility. And we have to undergo a process of attitude adjustment. And that's what the external energy is there for. She's the head mistress of the school of hard knocks. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that yatechasi tathakuru, I mentioned this morning, like a good parent, he just gives you choices and allows you to make your choice, but he describes the consequences also. Arjuna, if you want to surrender to me in pure devotion, you've understood everything I'm offering here. If you want to know me, you just hear about me. If you want to worship me, then you make that choice. Do what you like to do. But you should know very clearly that if you do not want to accept that option, then you're going to be turned over to Maya, and Maya's going to beat the living daylights out of you. Because that's what Maya does. This is the reality of material existence. And we as I said, either we've experienced it already or we will experience it. But that's what this material world is for. Now, the material world is for that purpose. In that way, it's a function of Krishna's mercy, but it is not Krishna's highest mercy. This is the point. There are gradations. So higher than that, there are many, many other forms of mercy that we can get higher than that. And, one of them is, the favor of a pure devotee of Krishna. Because yasya prasadad bhagavat prasado. Yasya prasadam nagati kutopi. How can you attain your goal if you're offending the Lord's devotees? Time after time after time, his lilas exhibit this lesson for us. So if we're intelligent, we can learn from Srimad Bhagavatam by reading sensitively. Otherwise, we may have to suffer. Is that okay? Anything else? Okay. Chashmawala with a green shirt. Oh, it's time for oddity, he says. So, okay, I'm very sorry, but maybe after the oddity, we can continue the questions then. I lost track of time. I did not see a clock here, so I'll have to stop here. And thank you very much for listening attentively. And all glories to Srila Prabhupada.